He's a titan of American cinema, a filmmaker whose name commands respect across generations. With a career spanning over 6 decades, Clint Eastwood has played gunslingers, detectives, war heroes, and directed some of the most powerful films of our time. He's won Oscars, redefined entire genres, and kept working while others quietly faded away. But there's one film buried deep in his past, one title that never makes his highlight reel. A project that even today he avoids watching, refuses to mention. It wasn't a box office disaster. It wasn't critically panned. In fact, many would call it a solid Western. So why does Two Mules for Sister Sarah haunt Eastwood more than any role he's ever taken? Was it the clashing personalities on set? A script that betrayed his instincts? Or something deeper? Something that symbolized a time when he wasn't in control of his own voice? Today, we uncover the untold tension behind a film he'd rather forget, and why the man who shaped the Western legacy still turns away from this single chapter in his story. Before he was the face of the American West, before the Oscars and standing ovations, he was just Clint. Born Clinton Eastwood Jr. on May 31st, 1930 in San Francisco. He came into the world during one of its hardest chapters, the Great Depression. His family didn't stay in one place for long. They moved from town to town across California, chasing whatever work his father could find. The road was bumpy, the money scarce, but the struggle planted something in him: resilience, independence, and a quiet, almost stubborn determination. Quint wasn't a Hollywood kid. He wasn't groomed for stardom. After high school, he worked every kind of job you could think of: lumberjack, steel worker, gas station attendant. Just a regular young man trying to make ends meet. Then came the draft. Eastwood served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War, stationed at Fort Ord. It was there, among fellow soldiers and aspiring performers, that something unexpected happened. He caught the acting bug. A chance meeting, a small opportunity, a spark. It wasn't about fame, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a shift from survival to storytelling. What no one could have predicted then was that this tall, soft-spoken man from California would one day redefine what it meant to be a movie star. After returning home from military service, Clint Eastwood wasn't exactly welcomed by casting agents with open arms. He was tall, rugged, and quiet, qualities Hollywood hadn't quite figured out how to package yet. But he kept showing up, audition after audition, bit parts, walk-ons. Nothing stuck. Until 1959. That's when he landed the role that would change everything: Rowdy Yates in the hit TV Western Rawhide. At first, he wasn't the lead. He was the second fiddle, the young, eager sidekick. But Clint had something others didn't, a kind of stillness that drew you in. He didn't need to shout to command attention. With just a glance, he could say more than most actors could with a monologue. Viewers noticed. So did the studios. Rawhide wasn't just a success, it was a launchpad. For Clint, it meant financial security for the first time. For Hollywood, it marked the arrival of a new kind of leading man. He wasn't polished, he wasn't flashy, but he was real. And in an era of post-war uncertainty and changing values, that mattered. Still, Clint wasn't content being TV famous. He had his eyes set on something bigger, roles that gave him more control, more depth, more danger. And just as Rawhide was hitting its peak, an Italian filmmaker named Sergio Leone came calling. The result would be more than just a career move. It would be a revolution. The year was 1964. American Westerns were growing stale, weighed down by recycled heroes and black and white morality. But halfway across the world in the hills of Spain, a new kind of Western was taking shape. One with dust in its teeth and blood under its fingernails. And at the center of it was Clint Eastwood. Director Sergio Leone saw something in Eastwood that Hollywood hadn't fully realized yet. That quiet tension, that unspoken danger. He cast him as a nameless drifter in a fistful of dollars, a character with no backstory, no clear allegiance, and no mercy. It was the birth of the man with no name, a figure who would become legendary across 3 groundbreaking zones. A fistful of dollars. For a few dollars more. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Together, they didn't just launch Clint into global stardom, they reinvented the genre. These weren't the clean-cut cowboys of old. These were gritty, violent, morally complex tales where justice was optional and survival was everything. Clint's performance was minimalist, almost mythic. He didn't speak unless he had to. He squinted into the sun, lit a cigar, and let the silence do the talking. Audiences around the world were captivated. A new kind of Western had arrived, and so had a new kind of star. But for Clint, this was more than fame. This was proof that he didn't need to play by Hollywood's old rules. He could rewrite them entirely. The cowboy was stepping off his horse. By the early 1970s, Clint Eastwood was no longer confined to the dust and tumbleweed of the Old West. America had changed, and so had its heroes. Cities were growing darker, crime more visible, and the line between right and wrong more blurred than ever. Enter Dirty Harry. In 1971, Clint took on the role of Inspector Harry Callahan, a hard-edged San Francisco cop who didn't wait around for backup or red tape. He hunted killers with a .44 Magnum, a glare that could shatter glass, and a moral code carved in stone. The line was unforgettable. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do ya, punk? It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a warning. And it sent shockwaves through American pop culture. Dirty Harry was controversial. Critics argued he's too ruthless, too unhinged. But to others, he was a reflection of real-world frustration, a symbol of justice in a time when justice felt increasingly out of reach. And Clint, he didn't flinch. He understood the character's complexity. Harry wasn't a hero. He was a man shaped by a broken system, trying to make sense of chaos in the only way he knew how. With this role, Clint Eastwood proved he wasn't a one-genre wonder. He was something more, a mirror to the times. And in the process, he became one of the most commanding figures in modern cinema. For years, Clint Eastwood had taken direction. He'd followed scripts, hit his marks, and delivered his lines with that signature quiet force. But behind the stoic gaze was something more, a filmmaker waiting to emerge. In 1971, he made his directorial debut with Play Misty for Me, a psychological thriller about obsession, control, and the thin line between passion and danger. It wasn't a Western, it wasn't action. It was intimate, suspenseful, and deeply personal. The film caught critics off guard. Clint wasn't just a tough guy in front of the camera. He had vision behind it. He directed with clarity, subtlety, and instinct. He understood pacing. He trusted silence. He let tension build like a slow-burning fuse. And he never looked back. Over the next decades, Eastwood's filmography became as diverse as it was daring. He directed westerns with moral complexity, like High Plains Drifter and Pale Rider. He explored war from both sides in Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. He told stories about aging, regret, redemption, and family. The Bridges of Madison County, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby. Eastwood's directing style was famously minimal. Natural lighting, few takes, no drama on set. It was efficient, focused, quiet, just like him. But his themes were loud. His films asked hard questions. What does justice cost? What makes a man good or dangerous? When is violence necessary? And when does it just break you? By the time Unforgiven hit theaters in 1992, Eastwood was no longer just playing in westerns. He was deconstructing them. And Hollywood took notice. Best Director, Best Picture, a standing ovation. Clint Eastwood had become what few actors ever do, a master storyteller. On paper, it looked like another solid western. A rugged mercenary, a mysterious nun, a journey through war-torn Mexico, filled with danger, betrayal, and firepower. Two Mules for Sister Sarah, released in 1970, paired Clint Eastwood with Shirley MacLaine, two of the biggest stars of the era. Directed by Don Siegel, who'd later become one of Clint's most trusted collaborators, the film had all the ingredients for success. But from the very beginning, something felt off. Eastwood wasn't new to challenging roles, but this time the friction came from behind the scenes. Shirley MacLaine had a reputation for being assertive, vocal, and hands-on when it came to her performances. She wasn't just acting, she was deeply involved in the process. Eastwood, by contrast, preferred instinct over rehearsal. Quiet preparation, a natural flow. Their styles couldn't have been more different. And it showed. The set became tense. The on-screen chemistry belied the real-life discomfort. Disagreements were frequent, and Clint would later describe the experience as one of the most unpleasant of his career, a rare public criticism from someone known for his restraint. But it wasn't just the dynamic with McClane. Eastwood felt uneasy with the film itself. Its tone shifted upwardly between drama and comedy. Its plot, especially the twist, revealing that Sister Sarah was actually a prostitute, struck Clint as contrived and emotionally hollow. This wasn't the kind of story he wanted to tell. Not anymore. At a time when he was transitioning from the mythic antihero of spaghetti westerns into more grounded, complex characters, Two Mules for Sister Sarah felt like a step sideways, or even backward. For Clint, it wasn't just a film he didn't like. It became a symbol of creative frustration, of being a voice without control. And even now, decades later, it remains the one project he never looks back on. As Clint Eastwood's career evolved, so did his standards. He had grown beyond the stoic gunslinger. By the early 1970s, he was searching for substance. Stories that challenged viewers, characters layered with conflict, and themes grounded in reality. Two Mules for Sister Sarah, in contrast, felt like a throwback to a version of Hollywood he was trying to escape. The film's mix of comedy and Western drama never fully gelled. Its tones swung from lighthearted banter to brutal violence, leaving the emotional core unfocused. To Eastwood, the story lacked weight. Its characters felt more like caricatures than people. And then there was the twist. Sister Sarah, the supposed nun, was actually a prostitute in disguise. What was meant to be clever came off to Clint as forced, an empty surprise that undercut the story's emotional stakes. It wasn't just bad writing, it was misaligned vision. For an actor beginning to demand more control over his work, this was a painful reminder of what it meant to be just a hired gun. He had no say in the script, no influence over the direction. He was there to play a part, not shape the story. And for someone like Eastwood, who valued authenticity, minimalism, and purpose in storytelling, that disconnect stung. Looking back, Two Mules for Sister Sarah didn't just disappoint him artistically, it captured a moment in time where his career was at odds with his identity. He wasn't yet the filmmaker we know today, but he already knew what kind of storyteller he didn't want to be. Every actor has a moment when they stop following and start leading. For Clint Eastwood, that moment came not with a triumph, but with a misstep. Two Mules for Sister Sarah wasn't a disaster. It performed respectably at the box office. But for Clint, it exposed a deeper problem. He was living in someone else's vision, acting in stories he didn't believe in, playing roles that no longer challenged him. That frustration became fuel. He began choosing his roles more carefully, gravitating toward characters with moral ambiguity, emotional weight, and personal stakes. But more importantly, he stepped behind the camera. As a director, he wasn't just taking control, he was rewriting the rules. No more compromises, no more scripts that didn't ring true. Eastwood began crafting films that reflected his worldview. Stories of solitude, redemption, regret, and quiet strength. He surrounded himself with collaborators who trusted his instincts. He worked quickly, efficiently, with minimal takes. He didn't need spectacle, he needed honesty, and audiences responded. High Plains Drifter, The Outlaw Juicy Whales, Unforgiven. These were westerns on his terms, stripped down, philosophical, brutal. They didn't glorify violence. They questioned it. It was a sharp contrast to the cartoonish tones of Two Mules for Sister Sarah. And in that contrast, a line was drawn. The Clint Eastwood of then, and the Clint Eastwood he chose to become. That one film, forgotten by some, rejected by him, wasn't just a detour. It was a lesson, and it helped define the legend that followed. Clint Eastwood has never been one to dwell on the past. He rarely looks back, And when he does, it's on his terms. He reflects through action, not nostalgia. Through his work, not his words. But one film is noticeably absent from that reflection. Two Mules for Sister Sarah is rarely mentioned in interviews. It's missing from retrospectives, absent from tributes and director commentaries. Even when Eastwood discusses his career openly, the film is quietly skipped, like a chapter he's chosen not to read aloud. For a man who's been open about box office failures, on-set struggles, and personal controversies, this silence is unusual and telling. Because Clint Eastwood doesn't need to criticize a film outright to make a statement, his silence does the work. It's not about revenge or bitterness or embarrassment. It's something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement that this film, unlike so many others, simply didn't align with who he was or who he was becoming. For an actor and director known for control, Two Mules for Sister Sarah was the opposite. It was compromise. It was frustration. It was a story that, for all its promise, didn't feel like his. And sometimes the clearest rejection isn't a criticism. It's a silence that lasts more than 50 years. In the years that followed Two Mules for Sister Sarah, Clint Eastwood didn't just recover. He evolved. He stopped chasing roles and started creating them. He no longer waited for good stories to land in his lap. He built them himself. And through that shift, something remarkable happened. The mistakes, the frustrations, even the regrets, they became part of the blueprint. The awkward tone of Sister Sarah pushed him to pursue moral clarity. The forced twist made him lean into realism. The lack of control drove him toward full creative ownership. And over the next few decades, he delivered. Unforgiven, Mystic River, Million Dollar Baby, Gran Torino, American Sniper, Sully. Films that challenged audiences, that offered no easy answers, and that echoed with the same restraint and honesty that Clint himself embodied. He mastered the art of saying more with less, of making silence speak louder than words, of crafting characters that weren't just strong, but human. And while many of his contemporaries faded, Eastwood kept going, decade after decade, not because he needed to, but because he still had something to say. The man who once walked away from a film he couldn't believe in became the man who created stories no one else could have told. In the end, Two Mules for Sister Sarah wasn't the failure of his career. It was the moment he chose to change its direction. Every artist has that one project, the one they leave off the list. For Clint Eastwood, Two Mules for Sister Sarah is that project. Not because it was a disaster, not because of failure, but because it didn't reflect who he was or who he was becoming. In a way, the film serves as a mirror of a man at a crossroads. Still an actor for hire, not yet a filmmaker in control. It was a lesson written in tension, in compromise, and in silence. And Clint Eastwood listened to that silence. He turned discomfort into direction, misalignment into mastery. He learned when to say yes, and more importantly, when to say nothing at all. Today, his name is etched into the story of cinema, not just for the roles he played, but for the stories he chose to tell. And for the ones he chose not to revisit. Because sometimes the film you walk away from tells you more about a man than all the ones he stayed to finish. And that too is part of the legacy.